Hollywood's golden era, a time of glamorous stars and glittering premieres. A Hollywood still controlled by its founding fathers. Tough, egotistical men who shared a common dream, the movies. I'm George Hamilton, and in the next hour, I will take you on a guided tour of Hollywood in its heyday. Along for the ride are stars like Charlton Heston, Debbie Reynolds, Michael Douglas, Mickey Rooney, and more. You'll also see exciting scenes from some of Hollywood's most famous films. And you'll meet the men who pioneered the motion picture industry. They were the lords of Hollywood. And theirs was a world of passion, greed, and power, the stuff that movies are made of. Only their stories are true. So join me and find out how a handful of men turned the sleepy suburb of Hollywood into the dream capital of the world. Fans and movie stars. Since the early days of Hollywood, there have always been plenty of both. But gone are the days when stars were under contract and at the studio's beck and call. Today, many of Hollywood's top stars call the shots.
I'm not one of those ones who believes that, quote, ignorance is bliss.
Michael Douglas not only stars in hit movies, he often produces them as well. In 1987, he won an Oscar for his role in Wall Street, but it wasn't his first Academy Award. That came over a decade earlier for producing the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
I like the times right now. I think it's really exciting. I think it's wide open. I'm not ashamed of the fact of having to have some awareness, some business acumen about this industry, and I think it's helped me survive.
Survival for actors in Hollywood's early years meant landing a contract at one of its giant studios. Great movie-making factories where stars were manufactured on an assembly line. One actor who broke the mold was Jimmy Stewart, a staunch believer in the studio system.
I've always been a sort of a booster of the big studio system. I've always felt that was and always will be the best way to make motion pictures.
The motion picture industry was founded by a small group of movie pioneers. Men like Adolf Zucker, a poor Hungarian immigrant who struck it rich, turning a meager penny arcade business into a giant movie empire. Louis B. Mayer, a former junk dealer from Russia, became the most powerful man in the history of Hollywood. Harry Cohn, a one-time song plugger, became known for his voice. He yelled louder than anyone else in Hollywood. Jack Warner, the son of a Polish cobbler, was well known for his corny jokes and for fighting with his famous stars. Darryl Zanuck, with an 8th grade education, was probably the most educated, and he was the only mogul at a major studio who wasn't Jewish. Carl Laemmle, a German-born peddler, eventually established the largest film studio in the world. He hired so many relatives, he became known around his lot as Uncle Carl. Laemmle gave the film industry a prototype studio, and even in his day, was recognized as one of Hollywood's first true leaders.
We're all indebted to you, Mr. Laemmle, for the courageous pioneering you have done in motion pictures.
Though not a founding father, Darryl Zanuck was certainly a movie pioneer. The brash leader of 20th Century Fox was once a prolific Hollywood writer. He remained ambitious as a studio chief.
We are all united in one common work, the work of making 20th Century Fox the outstanding company in the moving picture industry.
All the studio heads enjoyed promoting their studios. One man who covered the Hollywood beat during the reign of the movie moguls was author James Bacon. For 23 years, the Hollywood correspondent for the Associated Press.
Back in the old days, all the moguls, they ran the studio. They were like dictators.
We did what we were told to do. You know, we didn't want to do that movie role. We had to do that movie role.
When I came to Hollywood, everybody else was under contract. Everybody, writers, producers, directors, above all, actors.
I know a lot of actors balked and resisted because of the fact that they were told and they made these different films, but on the other side, you were working.
You worked every day, 6 days a week. And you didn't sit around and wait for something to come that you liked. They'd come to you and say, here's the script, go down to costume, get ready, the picture starts Monday. And you said, okay.
This is a take, rolling.
Quiet. Dave.
You're a fool, Red Butler. When you know I shall always love another man.
Listen, baby. You're the only real thing I ever wanted. Ever. You're mine. I've got to claim what's mine or I'll be nothing as long as I live.
I will come back tomorrow. Don't disappoint me, Miss Sala.
Now I say, is it likely I'll sit in the second class and I could sit in the first? For a gentleman of brains, you don't use them, do you?
Mary, I know what I'm going to do tomorrow and the next day and next year and a year after that. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet and I'm going to see the world.
The movies allow audiences to see any world imaginable. While the road to one of those worlds was paved with yellow bricks, the streets of Hollywood were once paved with gold. What started out as a business that offered 2 features for a penny today grosses nearly $5 billion a year at the box office. One thing hasn't changed. It's still considered risky business.
Every one of the great moguls were great gamblers, and that's why they made great pictures.
It takes a bit of a gambler to be in show business. After all, every film that they made, you invest millions. Maybe you'll get it back, and maybe you won't. So in a way, there has to be that in them, and they did take chances.
It was a daring thing in those early days to invest in this new medium, considered to be no more than a passing fad. But a small group of maverick filmmakers took a chance, and Hollywood has been cranking out movies now for nearly a century. A rare look at the very first feature film ever shot in Hollywood, and the movie's first mogul when the Lords of Hollywood continues.
Hollywood. You'd better be getting yourself a good husband and stop mooning about Hollywood. You know what she wants to do? She wants to go to Hollywood. I've known it all along. I've seen her making faces in the mirror and talking to herself. That's what comes of your movies.
The allure of the movies was at its peak during Hollywood's glamour years of the 30s and 40s. And like Janet Gaynor's character in the movie A Star is Born, millions have had fantasies of becoming a movie star, a dream that has come true for a lucky few. And while today, actors are a common and welcome sight in Hollywood, in the early days, they were met with less than favorable reviews. Instead of rolling out the red carpet, local merchants hung out unfriendly signs. But when movie mogul Adolf Zucker formed his first production company in 1912, things began to change for actors. Zucker signed Mary Pickford and helped make her America's sweetheart. Zucker's career in film spanned 7 decades, a pursuit that began at age 30.
I was in the fur business up to 1903, at which time I got out of the fur business and entered the penny arcade and motion pictures.
He eventually established Paramount Studios, where he signed top directors and allowed them enormous freedom in filmmaking. His impressive roster of directors included Preston Sturges, Billy Wilder, and Cecil B. DeMille. Perhaps Zucker's admiration for directors can be traced back to DeMille. Their association dates back to the very first feature film ever shot in Hollywood.
This is a part of the history of Hollywood, I suppose, the story of the first feature-length film that was made here was made because of a rainstorm. DeMille, Lasky, and Goldwyn were coming out, and they decided if you were going to make a Western, you should make it in the West. And they had determined that Flagstaff was good country to shoot Westerns in, which it is. But they got off the train and it was pouring rain. And DeMille said, "This is ridiculous. We don't want to work in a place like this. It's raining, for God's sakes. Let's get on." So they got back in the train, went to the end of the line, and if it hadn't been raining in Flagstaff the day before, we would be doing this interview in Flagstaff now.
The film was The Squaw Man, and this excerpt is a rare look at the very first full-length picture ever shot in Hollywood. Much of The Squaw Man was filmed inside this unimposing structure. Believe it or not, Hollywood's first studio was a converted barn complete with live chickens and cows. It has been converted again, this time into a museum open to the public. Inside, you'll find priceless mementos from Hollywood's rich history, like the chariot that was used in Charlton Heston's classic film Ben-Hur. Among the other treasures housed at the Hollywood Studio Museum are items that once belonged to acclaimed director Cecil B. DeMille. DeMille will always be remembered as one of Hollywood's foremost directors. His classic films include Union Pacific and The Greatest Show on Earth. Here you see him behind the scenes of another one of his great epics, The Ten Commandments.
He was a filmmaker. He was primarily a producer-director. He produced and directed, I think, 72 pictures, which is a staggering amount of film, far beyond what any filmmaker today will ever do.
Charlton Heston worked with many famous directors. The star of The Ten Commandments fondly remembers DeMille.
He was one of the mainstays of one of the major studios in the business and could do exactly the pictures he wanted to do at any budget he wanted to spend. DeMille was the Steven Spielberg of his time, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to say Steven Spielberg is the DeMille of the 80s, the 90s. The heads of Paramount must have gone on their knees every morning to thank God for DeMille, because he never made a failure for them.
But maybe it was DeMille who was the lucky one. Working for Adolf Zucker was like working for no other movie mogul. Zucker allowed his creative staff an unusual amount of freedom, and that's what made his studio, Paramount, so successful. He was the man behind the lavish MGM musicals. The story of the most powerful man in the history of Hollywood is next. The Brown Derby, a Hollywood hotspot during the 30s and 40s. A place where actors and producers could get away from the studio, but not from business. Big movie deals were made inside this restaurant, and some were actually written and signed on tablecloths. Now, there was one movie tycoon you would seldom see here, and that was Louis B. Mayer. He preferred eating with his studio employees in the commissary at MGM. Mayer rose to power when three failing studios merged, forming MGM. From the beginning, his philosophy was think big, and he spent millions on movies back in the days when his competitors could get by on $100,000 or less. His films were typically wholesome family entertainment.
Movies are entertaining enough for the masses, but the personalities on the screen just don't impress me. I mean, they don't talk, they don't act, they just make a lot of dumb show. Well, you know. Like that.
You mean?
MGM was like a little university. They had a school on the lot, they had a fire station on the lot, they had their own hospital on the lot. You know, it was like a city to itself, and Mr. Mayer was the mayor.
Under Mayer's rule, MGM became the Tiffany's of Hollywood studios. He created the star system, and MGM boasted more stars than there are in the heavens. Mayer was the stern patriarch of the celebrated MGM family.
He was sort of fatherly, you know. He would encourage the workers to believe